Welcome to my channel, The Magic of Java. This is my third book called The Londo and the Green Queen's Revenge. It's a novel. It's a novel about me coming to terms with the attempted destruction of an Englishman and his Javanese family. But it is a novel. Yes, it's based on experience. It's based on real people and celebrities, but amalgams of real people or caricatures of them. So if you do identify yourself, please forgive me, because it's only intended as a yarn. Given that I know that everything is in the mind, hallucinations generated by my brain, and that I had already moved to a higher vibration, I was perplexed when once again, whilst praying, I received a message to take care. Now, such messages are always imprecise and often not concerning the person I believed it to be, nor even the event I felt most likely. But these messages are always correct and warn of fairly imminent negative issues arising. Perplexed because I believe I can project a better future without such negativity by rising above it, as we create our own reality. I had already rejected solipsism, albeit that it would provide an explanation to my problems, as although all is mental, it is a collective mentalism, not solely within me. I know that such negativity is natural and a balance to the positivity I feel, but I am confused because I felt I could already rise above it. Then could it be that we don't so much project our futures, but project our precognitions, be they good or bad? Indeed, precognition could be no more than a memory of the future, if it is less clear than our memory of the past, because entropy has increased. If the latter, it is true it would seem that we cannot alter our trajectory through positive thinking. But there is a further twist. If there are multiple universes and multiple futures, then maybe we can by choosing the best future universe. I returned to contemplating how Pak Karno had felt the same presence in the same area as I had, knowing that he knew, as I do, that it's all in the mind. Indeed, it was he who placed this thought within my head. The concept is known as the psychological theory of magic, and was purported by Aleister Crowley, amongst others. But it also corresponds with a higher level of consciousness, when we dispense with the chimera of materialism. That we both share phenomena from outside this universe must be the connection we all have between our minds, and not an external presence, or it logically would not be generated in our minds. If this is true, then it is clearly related to quantum entanglement or telepathy. Strange though this may seem, we are perfectly happy to conceive of shared experience and a shared reality. But if we are hallucinations, then they are unlikely to be identical experiences and reality, simply ones that another's description has some resonance with our experience. The world you perceive is made of consciousness. What you call matter is consciousness itself. The Upanishads, the Vedas. I must consider, even if only fleetingly, that these feelings and my ability to completely control my future actually reflect that I am still possessed by dark forces, may be attracted by some of my practices, like opening my chakras. Certainly this is an explanation I have found some American Messianic Christians proffering. I always turn my back on evangelism, as to my mind it runs dangerously close to being godlike. But nevertheless, I must consider that I am being tricked by a Heathcliff like Satan. Indeed, I must, But then I should consider that those who believe they have been shown the true and only path are themselves infected by a trickster Satan. I can only go with my feelings, but those I have chosen to be influenced by seem to be full of God's love, whereas those I reject exhibit hatred. This is the reason why I completely reject the authoritarianism which is eating into Islam in Indonesia, despite clinging to a religious observance that many would find austere. This is my personal choice, and not one I seek to impose on others, nor use to judge others. But unlike those whose views I reject, I am prepared at least to consider their opinions, whilst they would seek to silence me. Whilst this means that everything is as real and valid as anything else, as everything is an hallucination, so what we call reality is much an illusion as our dreams, or my visions of ghosts. But this also suggests that I should place less significance on the Fortean and ghosts, as they are merely vehicles for my imagination. Indeed, the paranormal becomes the normal. Donald Hebb's sensory deprivation experiments at McGill University found out that not only was it easy to convince subjects about the paranormal, but this belief continued well after the experiments. I realise it's only a matter of time before we see the Rotherham Barry-Chuckle University or the Winstanley Wigan Casino University, but I am so encouraged that a university in Canada has honoured the creator of mucky postcards. It also confirms what in my heart I knew, and that is the point of magic, whether it be spells, jimat, wafak or necromancy, is really to focus on our minds, as we can create these changes simply by the power of our minds. Perhaps it's better to see what we call reality and the Fortean as being on a continuum and not a duality. But it is what we believe that matters, and if we really believe in ritual magic, then it is powerful in challenging and focusing the mind. However, if we believe simply in the power of our minds, then there is no need to resort to ceremonial magic. Of course, the same could be said of science and religion, especially when used for similar outcomes to magic. But I mention this not to relegate science and religion to be no more than magic. Know simply that they can be used to the same effect. This is why I am not keen for asking for favours when in prayer, and certainly no more than is sufficient, despite there being places in Muslim prayers where we encourage to do so. Indeed, to free ourselves from our fears and to lead a life contented with what is, there is no reason to ask for anything. But also it seems to me that there is a theological fallacy in asking for things, when our solutions are infinitely less appropriate than those Allah would choose for us. But for all I have discovered to be true, then a supreme consciousness provides a much better explanation than the alternatives. Almost certainly, this is the profound knowledge contained in the higher veils of Kajawan. What my wife really knows all along, and why she is so dismissive of her brother, who still struggles with the lower veils akin to ritual magic. Logically, therefore, Dukan, Pak Ustad and even Pak Karno have no real power except that of suggestion, which for those who are less honest is no more than a confidence trick. So Dukan, like my brother-in-law, do not know what to believe themselves, and can only fool those who are more stupid than him, of which there are few. Only we ourselves can remove our spirit possession by turning off our awareness of them. Yes, somebody like Pak Karno can help, because through his quietness, determination and own belief, or will, we ourselves believe, but only through his power of suggestion. Maybe God is working through Pak Karno, and through him God helps us. But ultimately, it is all within our minds, and only we can cure ourselves. Now, we really are on the boundaries of physics and metaphysics. Physicians use Western medicines, a byproduct of the petrochemical industry, which alter our perceptions to convince us that they are working and we cure ourselves. The same is true of masters like Pak Karno, who convince us in his methods, and again we cure ourselves. Not once did Pak Karno express alarm nor doubt, and that is his greatest asset. Maybe this comes from Pak Karno's Catholicism and belief in God, and this is how God works through him. I truly believe if this is the intention of the helper's intervention, which actually have the effect, so the helper has to believe what they are doing will really help. But such powers are not dependent on God, although once again a supreme being provides a better explanation. I began my journey by recognising that time and space are constraints on the Western imagination, constructs to help us to describe what we believe is our universe. And according to Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, when we measure one with precision, the other becomes precise. Having now read Schopenhauer, what I should really say is that space, time and causality are limitations on the human mind. But now I have realised that the self is also a construct, a Freudian slip, constraining our ability to think and act. Indeed, if time and space are illusions of consciousness, as Einstein recognised, then so is the self, leaving us only with consciousness to ponder. So if my messages from Allah are also internally generated, is Allah within me? Logically, this has to be valid. God sleeps in the rock, dreams in the plant, stirs in the animal, and awakens in the man. Ibn Arabi. This means that Sunan Sittinjar was correct when he stated that it was possible for every human to articulate the divine power from within his inner self. Despite the other Sunan secretly agreeing with Sunan Sittinjar, they murdered him for proclaiming this belief, and have been pains to reject godlike feelings, as these are the foundation of destructive beliefs and evil acts. Each time on my journey I uncover a profound revelation. I feel it is the ultimate, but it is simply a higher level of abstraction, as revealing the whole truth would be more than any human could cope with. This is why Kajawan has 7 veils, each nothing like, even contradicting the previous. This feels like another of those profound revelations. We are all God. God is within us all. When I love my servant, I am hearing through which he hears, his eyesight through which he sees, the foot with which he walks, and the hand with which he grasps. The Prophet Muhammad, Hadith Qudusi. But then we focus on the self and his human vessel. This leads to feelings of being godlike. If we are connected and there is no self, then there can be no justification for self-interest in greed, if indeed there ever was. Indeed, it is like a tree's roots fighting with each other for water. It serves no purpose. Love really is the answer and is everywhere. There was a time when I blamed my companion if his religion did not resemble mine. Now, however, my heart accepts every form. Love alone is my religion. Ibn Arabi. If we can free ourselves from the self, and then the knowledge that is God is no longer, leads to acting godlike, as we are concerned about God's universe, not just the individual human vessel carrying our consciousness. You could tear down the mosque, break down the temple, Break all that can be broken, but never break anyone's heart, because that is where God lives. Baba Bulleh Shah. But if God is within us all, then logically so too is Satan. Of course he is. Yes, he's Milton's Heathcliff-like Satan, but only because what could be more seductive than our own false ego? Go on, you deserve it. It's only human nature. Laws are to keep others in check. It's only a crime if you get caught. We punish others because they remind us of our own inner demons, and so we have developed justice systems and the rule of law based on the fear which lies within. So what of those who believe that they have the right to judge and punish others? These are the people who suppress their inner fear and hatred the most. The very people we allow to rule us. But then the world's major religions seem to have a monopoly on convincing us that we are all sinners, but not quite as sinful as the next man. So if God is within us all, we are all the messages and entities I have experienced really from God, or even God, him or herself? Well, yes and no. As with everything, the synthesis of relativism is countered by the antithesis of absolutism. So absolutely all is in the mind, while relatively we can describe shared experiences. But critically, they're not quite the same shared experience as others have. I've already accepted that we can move between universes, which might include what we call the past and the future. But these are concurrent with what we believe is the present. For some time I have known it is possible to create our own futures. Whenever it's something I have really wanted, I have been granted it. Rarely quite as I wanted it, but it's always happened. So, for example, I became a DJ on the Northern Soul and rave scenes when I no longer really cared. My business was a success, but at the expense of my family and my happiness. I really did retire at 50, but without the savings to do so. I have found happiness with Maddie, for her to be snatched from me, to re-emerge as Mawa, and we now live in Gunungkidul, although unprepared for the change. Even my meeting Maddie was a subconscious desire for happiness. I had endured enough of my partner, could no longer live celibate. I needed more, but refused to let this become conscious, despite sending unconscious signals to all that I was on the trap. Then, of course, my partner and I had prayed at Mila Grosser's grave for a baby, which was immediately granted, but now Branwell has schizophrenia. Despite always knowing this, my Western science training has held me back from ever discussing it or even trying to comprehend it. But what I have failed to comprehend was that happiness comes from within. So when I wished for happiness, I was also wishing for the misery of nearly losing Mawa through black magic and poisoning, so that I could find the introspection which leads to happiness. Within your heart, there's a space no bigger than an atom. God has placed the 18,000 universes, good and evil, and the wisdom to differentiate between these. This is your farmland. If you plough and land deep with your wisdom and sow God's qualities and actions with the knowledge of the difference between good and evil, you will receive the wealth of your soul, the bountiful harvest of undiminishing grace. Bawa Muhadim, The Wisdom of Man, 1980. Our thoughts, our energy, and this must be why we can create our futures and indeed our pasts. But each of our choices between alternatives creates new universes. In some quantum theories, this is known as many worlds, but these worlds already exist, which therefore means that we must create another self. So our past and futures selves influence our current. This is the self. Then if this is the self is an illusion and we are part of a bigger organism, designed, constantly redesigned and recreated by God, then our free will must be limited. Now, this is only shocking if we hold on to a fixation of the individual, but I've already accepted that the soul is fragmented, then surely so is our consciousness. So like everything else, free will is a half-truth with its own antithesis. Could these messages and entities be sent from our other selves, from the past and the future, to influence the current, the precognition that I have always alluded to? If so, then surely we see our current reality, the inside of Plato's cave, is also influencing what we believe our pasts and our futures. In fact, there are other cells, and not yet our cells, but a part of a larger organism which we all form a part of. These other cells embody God, because God is within us all. If we are not God, but a part of God, whilst never being God. When you know yourself, your I-ness vanishes, and you know that you and Allah are one and the same. Ibn Arabi. So the higher consciousness is also formed by a collective consciousness. However, whilst God is infinite, even collectively we are finite. God is everywhere, within us all, and we are all within God. Like my beloved little stick of Blackpool rock, cut us anywhere, and you will find God written all the way through. But we are not God. Only together, in full knowledge, do we begin to get close to what God is. To know oneself is to know God. So we must truly know ourselves to achieve that oneness with God. Those of you who have followed each of my episodes will understand that how I have been exposed to black magic and the left and the right hand paths. It seems to me that the left-hand path is about becoming one with God, a supreme being, but whilst retaining the self, even becoming a God, i.e. godlike. As a devout Muslim, I believe this to be an illusion, a trick, for we cannot become one with God through selfishness. So the supreme being is not the supreme being. In all probability, it is a Heathcliff like Satan. For so many that I have witnessed and followed this path has become consumed by their own addictions. Indeed, like Indonesians themselves, I can now identify people who have followed the left-hand path as they appear to be possessed, despite their persuasive denials. Whereas the right-hand path is more concerned with becoming one with humanity for eternity, by suppressing the self and the desires of the self. But to achieve the oneness of God, we cannot simply dismiss the left-hand path. We need to understand it and how it is within us. Only then can we fight temptation. Again, relativism and absolutism create a contradiction if we cannot comprehend another dimension. But maybe everything we believe in and call reality is a game, a pastime for God, who has split herself into us all. This life is a world, is a pastime and a game. Al-Quran, Surah 29:64. There is less need to dwell on this, profound though it seems, as much of what is the purpose of it all, especially if it's just a game. In any case, to contemplate that God would play a game is a metaphor, for we cannot really contemplate God nor his or her actions. Man is a mystery, and I am his mystery, for I am himself, and I am also myself. The Prophet Muhammad, Hadith Qusudi. Maybe we're here to gather information, to really generate profound knowledge, but also maybe it's simply a game and I'm taking it all too seriously. Or is there another force at play in driving us to seek this knowledge? This is shocking to those of us who were brought up as a Christian, After the First Council of Nicaea, the Protestant Reformation expunged religion of humour. But why wouldn't God engage in such an innocent pleasure? After all, when we laugh, it's so pure we can think of nothing else. Although isn't laughing an anxiety released? A description which appealed to the anorak in me is that we live in a map we created of the world, but we have no idea what the world is actually like. Maybe it's also wrong to contemplate, because I can never fully comprehend Allah. Of course, if life really is a game, then we will be governed by algorithms which set out the rules of the game, which really is what we call physics. Interestingly, physicists are beginning to discover code surrounding our universe, which would go some way to proving this theory. So everything could be information. Even this information could provide the framework for the game we call life. Although this is just a two-dimensional theory, it is a development of string theory. I need to emphasise this is just my conjecture. Bizarrely, though this all seems, it would explain why physicists describe as the measurement problem, by which our consciousness appears to influence the behaviour of matter. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Max Planck. Jung describes the first and second halves of our lives as a concept that May have borrowed and developed. Jung sees this first half as being about living and indeed competing in what we perceive to be the reality, whilst the second half is about preparing ourselves for death, something we appear to be doing badly in the West, especially my own mother. The first half of life is devoted to forming a healthy ego. The second half is going forward and letting go of it. Unfortunately, most of us grow old but never grow up. There is, however, a further twist to growing old, and that is our concept of time, to speed up so that when we approach death, not having completed our life, and like Martin and my mother, we chase goals we can never achieve. But if we accept that life is a game, then the first half of our lives is about playing the game, and the second about rising above it. I have always thrown myself into games, attempting to comprehend the algorithms which allow me to develop a strategy to win, as I have with life itself. Although in life I have frequently found the algorithms to be contradictory, even illogical. Then when I mastered the game, I became much more reflective, even spiritual, as I am now. But the notion of a game is a common theory of conspiracy theorists that I have been trained to reject. Around a year ago, I wondered if we could create heaven here on earth, and I believed this earth to be hell. But now I realise there's only hell, or indeed heaven, if that's how we view it. We're able to move to a higher or lower vibrations, creating our own heaven and hell. To a degree, I was correct that we create our own hell, as negative acts we institute in one universe will come back to us in another, so we can learn from our misery. If we abuse our good fortune through acquired knowledge or our own self-interest, we will always be forgiven by God. But we will be disadvantaged in another universe, even forced to understand the misery of our previous action. Knowledge and ignorance are poles on the same continuum. So ignorance is a rejection of knowledge, because knowledge always exists. So to reject knowledge is an abuse. People who have intended and loved what is evil in the world intend and love what is evil in another life, and then they no longer allow themselves to be led away from it. This is why people who are absorbed in evil are connected to hell and actually are there in spirit, and after death they crave above all to be where their evil is. So after death, it is we, not the Lord, who cast ourselves into hell. Emanuel Swedenborg, Afterlife, a guided tour of heaven and its wonders. But if time's an illusion, then there is no past, no present, so no future, and therefore my terminology is too precise. There is no ultimate garden in any real sense in which we find ourselves, simply a state of bliss, when we're at one with God and have finished collecting experiences and have profound knowledge through raising our vibrations to those with God, Him, herself. Although I need to point out that many Sufis see this state of bliss as being a oneness with God, which I have to agree with, but was searching for a description of the ecstasy of this oneness. Your personal nature seeks its paradise, Ibn Arabi. But even this state of bliss is not an end, as there's no time, so simply a state within a cycle, which we all reach before returning, having forgotten all. Maybe, just maybe, the cycle can end when we have all reached this state of bliss. But this seems less likely than infinite cycles. Furthermore, this could be anywhere in any universe, not simply what we call this world, and with our consciousness not having always been housed in a human form. Indeed, we raise our vibrations to such a level it cannot be inherent in the inherently self-obsessed human form. You might like to see what I'm talking about as reincarnation and karma, and whilst I'm certainly not rejecting these concepts, even though most Muslims would, it simply isn't how I choose to define things. I think my reluctance is because I know that all is in the mind, and so everything is a construct or hallucination we generate. So in reincarnation and karma are abstractions which help us to understand difficult concepts, but by necessity they oversimplify. Certainly Kajawan belief incorporates such Hindu and Buddhist traditions, so my rejection has nothing to do with my Muslim faith. In any case, it'll be apparent that I'm willing to explore all traditions to assist me on my journey. Indeed, whilst the Messianic Muslims are certain there is no reincarnation, Al-Quran also enables us to come to the opposite conclusion. How can you disbelieve in Allah when you were lifeless, and He brought you to life, and He will cause you to die, and He will bring you back to life, and then to Him you will be reunited. Al-Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah 2:28. So I'm willing to consider that far from there being multiple universes, there is no universe, and that everything is nothing at all. To a certain degree, this position is closer to my interpretation offered in Quantian Bayesian, but this is still to be explored within quantum theory. In fact, the more I think about there being multiple universes or no universe, the more I become to realise that both are true. To a scientist, reality in the universe is something which cannot be proven to be true or untrue. So we are both inside and outside Plato's cave simultaneously, in contradiction to how Plato himself conceived his cave. Indeed, this would help to explain the apparent contradiction of free will. Once again, the words of Uncle Norman seem so profound. Nothing matters when you die, nothing at all, and everything matters. Now, I might add, everything means nothing, and nothing means everything. We learn most from pain rather than joy, so even the most heinous crimes are all a part of mankind and the universe's learning. We can only fully appreciate that racism and genocide are wrong once we've experienced their effects and horrors. In that sense, those crimes we commit in this universe don't matter, as they all add to our understanding. But at the level of the individual, which of course is an illusion, then such crimes do not go unnoticed. Those committing such crimes in this world and cling to the illusion of the individual and will experience those crimes committed against them as an individual. You might like to see this as God's punishment, but if these individuals can free themselves from self-interest, they can free themselves from this fate, as they no longer need to be removed for the safety of others. So in effect, we punish ourselves, just as we do in this universe, by believing that humans are inherently evil and that others need punishing for this evil. Only once every part of humankind, every part of the universe can grasp this and rid themselves of individualism, greed and interest, can we move on. So the mission of those who have understood this is to impart this knowledge on those who have not or who have rejected it. At the level of the universe, this is a macro version of the punishment versus rehabilitation debate. You see, punishment is like revenge. It only validates the original misdemeanor. To punish someone is to invalidate the loss and the harm by creating further loss and harm. Indeed, the whole notion of crime and punishment, incorporating the concept of having served one debt, established that this is permissible to commit a crime if one is prepared to accept the forfeit. But only God has the right to judge and restitute. Western readers are probably confused by my views as a Muslim. You see, in the West, we feel that we have the right to define what a Muslim is and how they should behave, while frequently knowing very little about the religion itself. In fact, I'm often accused of not being a true Muslim by Western atheists, who will point to some of the more extreme beliefs of the Wahhabis, which only challenged the compassionate mainstream in the 18th century. So whilst Wahhabis and other Protestant Muslims behave in a back-to-basics Islam, what is their definition based on? As we need only to look to Indonesia to find Islam practiced as it was many centuries ago. Of course, Wahhabis reject Indonesian Islam as folk Islam, even suggesting takfir, and certainly Kejawen is influenced by other beliefs. But in general, the practices in Indonesia were the practices common throughout the Muslim world during the 15th century. But I proclaim my faith, pray 5 times a day, provide zakat charity, and fast during Ramadan. True, I may never go on Hajj, but only because there are so few places available to people from Indonesia, and I see Umrah as much about tourism as an obligation. We call deranged criminals Islamic terrorists, but would never accept the term Christian extremists for the Ku Klux Klan. Can you imagine the outcry there would be if Muslims claimed that all Christians worship the Mayor of Rome and they get drunk and engage in ritual cannibalism every time they go to church? Well, people in the West feel that they have the right to commit exactly the same faux pas when describing Islam. Few in the rest realise that the Bible, along with the Book of Psalms and the Tanakh, are considered holy books in Islam. And after Muhammad, Jesus, Isa and Abraham are the most important prophets. In fairness to Christians, the Messianic Muslims shout the loudest, and are so certain in their beliefs, it's hard to believe that this is an extreme and minority interpretation, not an original thought, and I have been unable to trace its origins, but they say that religion is like a swimming pool. All the noise comes from the shallow end. Can you blame people in the West for confusing Islam with fascism when so many leaders in the Islamic world do exactly the same? So in reality, most people in the West really know quite a lot about Islam, as it is not so different to Christianity. They simply have been told otherwise. All my views can be found within the Sufi tradition in Islam, and certainly within Kajawan. True, some Muslims may find what I have said heretical, but then everything I have said can be found in Al-Quran or Hadith. So it's all about interpretation, as indeed is the Islamic tradition. Nevertheless, I've looked far and wide for my revelations, and I've explored the boundaries of heresy, but needed to stop myself from acting godlike, a boundary those who accuse others seem to transgress without a second thought. Indeed, the right to judge and absolve sin is itself a heresy. But accusations and counter-accusations of heresy resulted in 130 years of bloody conflict in Europe, so I'm certainly not wanting to enter such an argument. Of course, when looking at the Bible, and particularly the Old Testament, it would be possible to also find much of what I described. But the difference is that there are few truly Christian movements which embrace such thoughts. Early on in the development of the Christianity, Emperor Constantine expunged such beliefs at the First Council of Nicaea, and they were brutally suppressed by the Inquisition, whereas Islamic societies embraced science and indeed made amazing advances and discoveries, which could only be incorporated within Christian societies following the Renaissance. So rather amazingly, Islam appears to anticipate the latest thinking in quantum mechanics to a much greater degree than mainstream Christianity does. A person who follows a path for acquiring knowledge, Allah will make easy passage to paradise for him. The Prophet Muhammad, Hadith Qudusi. This leads me to consider, what if what we call reality is when we actively engage in the game? Then sleep and dreams are when we are inactive in the game. We know that our brain is every bit as active when we are dreaming as when we are awake. So our dreams could be at least as valid as when we believe we are awake. V.S. Ramachandran believes that when we are dreaming, we are moving some ideas from the right to the left-hand hemisphere of the brain, which allows us to organise a more holistic concepts. But could our dreams be closer to a truth than when we are simply avatars preoccupied in our own sims? Then we need to wake from our wakedness. We should at least ponder that everything we hold as true is untrue, or at least a half-truth, despite my beginning my journey by seeking the truth. If so, then our life's joys, happiness, sadness, and tribulations, all sent to keep us preoccupied, to keep us playing the game, or as Alan Watts has said, society is a hoax, so they are designed to keep us in a cave. As if all isn't bizarre enough to make sense of brain activity at its highest shortly after death. In all probability, however, within our dreams are alternative beliefs which interact with those containing our reality. This is the reason why those memories which no longer fit within our world we relegate to having dreamt. So all these strange experiences from our childhood I wrote off as mere dreams. To a certain degree, they are dreams, as anything which involves us imagining a different reality is a dreamlike state. But we don't have to fall asleep to access it. But maybe there is a further point to such thoughts, and that is to question all of our revelations and beliefs, whether induced by psychotropics or not. Is it logical that I reject the final tryst, but I have accepted the journey so far? But now some conspiracy theorists claim that the game, or matrix as they call it, is created by jinns. As a Muslim, I must give this some consideration. Whether it be the jinn or Satan, they are created by God to test us. So is this ultimately God who created the game and not jinn? If, however, this is within our mind, then we need to create the game and police its rules ourselves, the elite imposing servitude as a part of the game. If you are not already paranoid enough, let me add a further theory to send you over the top. I'm convinced that time is non-linear and that the future can influence the present. What if the game was developed by humans of the future, a sophisticated Sims, and our joys and miseries are another's entertainment? Imagine your turmoil, keeping a commuter entertained on their mobile phone. Or worse still, the game is being used as a marketing simulation to test new products, their channels and marketing. I know it's better not even to contemplate it. Oh no, I've just had another thought. What if the simulation is used for testing new pharmaceuticals and vaccines as an ethical alternative to testing on animals? Even if you find this too much to consider, at least consider military strategy simulations, including PSYOPs and false flag operations, maybe even the 11th of September. But now, for the really frightening twist, the general hypothesis and my proposition are both unprovable and irrefutable. In other words, this is a hypothesis which will always be amongst our darkest thoughts. Perhaps my journey is simply an intellectual gain, mirroring what I falsely believed was the game of life. After all, where I've stopped in my logic is completely arbitrary. Where should I decide to jump off in terms of this journey? Well, for now, I might as well consider that we are indeed engaged in a game, but not a game within a game, and that we see what we see as reincarnation is not recycling, but an opportunity to learn more. In spite of everything, I instinctively reject conspiracies, aliens, and the notions that we are controlled by an outside force other than God, whilst accepting some of its implications. If both the past and the external world exist only in the mind, and the mind itself is controllable, what then? George Orwell, 1984. Well, that concludes this chapter from my book, The Londo and the Green Queen's Revenge, which is my third book in the series. I do hope you've enjoyed it. I'm hoping to add further chapters about every week, and so far I've managed to do this. If you'd like to hear more from me, then please subscribe and hit the bell. That way you get notifications of when a new chapter is released. In addition, I don't seem to be working very well with these algorithms on YouTube, and my videos really aren't being promoted as they should. So if you could also hit the like button and sort of make some comments, I think that will help me to get noticed. I hate to ask you that, but I really do need more viewers. But thank you for this viewing. Thank you so much.